cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you for joining. Hi, Dana. Good evening from Manila.
How are you, Sohail? So nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you. And you are in US, right? It's almost 12 hours time difference exact, right?
Yes, I'm joining from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thank you so much. I'm excited for our conversation.
And it's good. It's Friday for both of us. Maybe you can introduce yourself. I think when we discuss, you are doing so many wonderful things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Diana Páez. I'm the Senior Director for Energy and Mobility at the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. We are a solutions-driven nonprofit affiliated with the university, and all of our work is actually global. We focus on low and middle income countries. We work to support entrepreneurs, enterprises, and ecosystems around the world. So all of our work is quite focused on business knowledge and on leveraging the private sector and a lot of opportunities to support and foster economic growth in the countries in which we work. And I've been with WDI for 10 years now. So doing really exciting work across specifically the energy and mobility sector. We're doing work on energy transition and accelerating the e-mobility transition, which is just been a big focus of my work for the past almost 6 years.
Yes, because energy transition initially was just, okay, let's get renewable energy. Then the batteries come in, then electric vehicles come in, V2G coming now. I think electric vehicles are in a way leading the energy transition. No?
Absolutely. Certainly, it's been one of the technologies that I find it fascinating just to be working in this space and following and monitoring what's happening with the different technologies, but EVs specifically. I'm super, super interested in this topic because it represents such an important opportunity, I think, for countries around the world, certainly for low and middle income countries, to have two types of opportunities, I think. Some of them are interested in being part of the value chain, of the supply chain, and can really participate in EV production. I love the fact also that we think about EVs across different segments. Necessarily, of course, just cars, but electric motorcycles, electric three-wheelers, and even, of course, mobility in other places and other areas such as electric ferries and the like. So really the breadth of opportunity when one thinks about the EV value chain is still big, right? It's so ample for those countries. And so we look at that side of things, a lot of work on the EV supply chain and the types of opportunities that exist for businesses, for countries interested in capturing those opportunities. And also, of course, in terms of promoting and enabling EV adoption and what that represents in terms of climate benefits and so forth. So there's just a whole universe there. Another area that we work a lot on is with startups, identifying and then supporting innovations on e-mobility that have really the potential to grow and again, enable those countries to be able to increase uptake there. So it's really interesting to see also at the country level, different types of innovations and business models.
Yeah, another aspect, thanks for highlighting. I'm biased, I come from the energy sector. And it's very obvious that before we had countries, the energy rich and the energy poor. So energy security meant you have to very closely monitor what's the oil price going to be. But we all have access to sun. So once you start converting those vehicles into electric, and at the same time, your energy sector becomes solar dependent or renewable energy of any form, wind or hydro, suddenly it improves energy security. You don't have to watch the sort of what's the price of a barrel of oil, no?
It is a paradigm shift, absolutely. And I think there is an element of, in a way, perhaps a more level playing field from the perspective, as you said, we all have access to those types of resources. Of course, there are still some hurdles from the technology perspective or just in terms of scaling. That's definitely not an even playing field, but the types of opportunities that open up are just many. And I love that you highlight the synergies between, of course, EVs and energy sector more broadly. And there are many ways to really optimize and maximize the benefits of those vehicles. But again, we think about it in terms of the technology itself, the innovations that enable that uptake, and also the ecosystem that is needed to be able to actually take advantage of that, whether it is on the production side of things or adoption side of things. And that's an area where we've also done a lot of work. And I think it's really interesting because it's such a big space of thinking about policy frameworks, infrastructure that is needed, and also the talent, the workforce piece, which is an area that many of our partners and in many countries, of course, it has become much more prominent in terms of how to prepare the workforce, what types of skills are needed for electric vehicles, and to be able to, again, capture those opportunities.
Yeah, and the skill transition. You take it to a mechanic and open a car. Where is the carburetor? Where is the fan belt? So that skill transition and also just transition, no? These must be big items on the table, no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned those two things. In terms of skill transition, we've seen that in many different countries. And one of the really cool things about our work on WDI is that we work in different regions as well. And we really try to focus on those cross market insights and connections. So, whether that means connecting partners in Costa Rica with partners in the Philippines that are both trying to work on EV training, for example, or working with our partners in Mexico, where we've done a lot of substantial work on e-mobility, both in terms of with universities or assessing different types of EV training programs. That's also an area that I think is just growing in importance. And then coupled with that, there's of course a really important element of just transition and just ensuring that there are trainings available and support available for incumbent workers. And I'm sitting here in Michigan, the capital of the historic and legacy automotive manufacturing industry around the world, of course. In the mid-century, it's been such an important place for the industry. And so certainly a lot of considerations both here and around the world in terms of shifting from ICE vehicle production to EV production and what that means for workers who are already involved in auto manufacturing as the companies kind of shift gears, and also what can be done to attract new talent to develop those EV supply chains.
Yeah, you mentioned Costa Rica. That's Monica Araya's country, right?
That's right. She's wonderful. Yes, I know her. And we also talking to one very cool institute that they do a lot of training for EVs, not only in Costa Rica, but across Latin America. So it's also great to see so many strong and really with deep expertise, people in organizations working on these areas already.
So, what are the governments generally doing? Of course, you have the lever. Of course, you can give some policies so that things become cheaper and people adopt. But also, there are a lot of mindset going on, a lot of propaganda going on. So, you have to teach people what is right, what is wrong, right? The misinformation, way too much. And then in the middle, of course, you have to make sure if you already have an existing industry, workers, how do you protect them or create those who do not have an industry? This is an opportunity to create something. So what are the key lever the governments are using in general?
Yeah, such a great question. And I think you were alluding a little bit to the point that it really depends on profile, of course, and the specifics of each country. We see, for example, some of our partners in Mexico who are really from the government agencies working on innovation and economic development. They're quite worried and, of course, invested in making sure that this transition is smooth, that it can be maximized, that it can be done in a thoughtful way, that they can prioritize innovation. So there are ways, of course, to prioritize that and to support innovation, homegrown innovation. So it might be mechanisms to support their own startups and innovators to be able to tackle some of their problems or related to mobility in their own and opportunities in their own communities. But also some other governments might be very interested in attracting new companies and investments, of course, to their communities as well. And there are different ways, certainly policy incentives and working on the policy framework itself so that you can have an enabling environment. And one of the most important things I think also is having the right sort of mix of players across the ecosystem, because it's not a transformation that only depends on one agency, right? Or one player in government, or so many things have to work right at the same time and in sync, that we found the most powerful progress can really be done when there is a combination of those different players and partnerships across the ecosystem. So in our work in Mexico, we work with government agencies, so state government agencies in particular, but also companies and industry associations, as well as universities. So you're really hitting all of the key different aspects that need to make this shift and need to enable this shift. And I think that's a really powerful lever for this type of development.
Yeah, and also EVs is such a simple technology in a sense. Everybody understands cars. So while the governments of the world was thinking going top down, which they had to do for solar because it's a new technology, new content, you can actually generate electricity on your own. But vehicles are different. If you drive a car, you say, hey, I like this car because we all have driven cars, right? So there may be an opportunity of bottom-up activities, or maybe it's already happening because we are all in the same connected world. So we can see what's happening in Michigan. Now I can see what's happening in Thailand tomorrow, but at the same time, Tesla's robotaxi got launched. What in this field have seen. So there is a lot of bottom-up activities also going on, especially with your startup. So what are the exciting startups you're working on? I'm sure while government is trying top down, the bottom up, a lot of exciting stuff these young people are doing, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it also depends a lot on, certainly on the different countries. But I love just keeping track of some of the startups. In Ghana, we've been working with an electric bike startup called Wahoo, and they're a wonderful team. And they are really keen on establishing a full supply chain to manufacture and produce those electric bikes in Ghana. And I love that that's their mission from the beginning. And they've been working on creating all of those conditions and have made a lot of progress over the past couple of years. So actually, we'll be publishing a case study about them, about their supply chain localization strategy. And they have a very innovative ecosystem approach to be able to support that growth and utilization of the bikes. And so that's an example. In Africa, there are several, of course, in terms of electric motorcycles and so forth. In Asia, it's also interesting to look at electric two-wheelers, battery companies as well. Now, recently, we completed a new project on e-mobility in the Philippines, which was also wonderful to be able to connect and learn about some of the startups there and the startup ecosystem, some of the both opportunities they're seeing and challenges as well. And then I mentioned ferries earlier. There is a company that they really are looking and going for electrification of ferries in the Philippine waterways, which is really great. And they are developing charging stations just to include them right there on the docks so that it can be easier. And that can be a part that is enabled as well, which is one of the key challenges for electric vehicles in many places. So I think looking at some of those innovations, but also looking at the business models that are working or not working and all the innovative approaches that the startups are employing can really reveal a lot of those lessons, right? And then we really endeavor to convey and to communicate and disseminate those lessons across different markets, which I think is very exciting because it's easy to talk about the problems. This will never work because A, B, C, D. But when you start highlighting the solutions and how innovation is really overcoming those barriers, that's where you can really see precisely the power of business, which is one of the key principles or values of our institute.
Good. The Philippine ferry will be just here. I can see the Pasig River from my window. So
Perfect. You can get one of those.
yeah, I'm waiting for that. Now, what are the findings, say, Philippine, where I am right now, is net energy importing country. It has not much traditional energy source, if you like. Of course, it has the largest geothermal after US. So have you looked at if there is a 10% adoption of electric vehicle, then what will be the impact in terms of importing of fossil fuels?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We got a little bit into this conversation with some of the experts we talked to in the Philippines, including people from DOE. And one of the things, the most striking things I think for us was that from the policy perspective, there are a lot of building blocks already for e-mobility in the Philippines. And in recent years, there's been a really big policy push, as I'm sure, to enable uptake and also to foster the development or more opportunities in terms of the supply chain for local companies. And so in our recent research, which we conducted in partnership with the Asian Development Bank and then quite a few local players and stakeholders, we looked at both the policy framework and then also the market. So just looking at market trends, very recent market dynamics in terms of EV production and adoption as well. And then the workforce piece. And we talked about EV skills a little bit more earlier. That's an area of certainly of concern and interest for companies in the Philippines to be able to have the talent needed to production and adoption of electric vehicles, and specifically for we're thinking 2 or 3 wheelers. And there are quite a few local companies actually that are engaged in manufacturing those vehicles. And we saw a lot of opportunities there across those three aspects. And we looked at each of those with a just transition lens. And we also touched on that earlier, which I think that added a really important dimension also to consider what are the sort of next steps, what are things that are working really well. In some ways, of course, the Philippines is making really big strides. In other ways, there are also challenges which are common in other places too. And so that's one of the things that it was very interesting to highlight in our research and in our report. And then going back to your point about energy, just more broadly, one of the things that from the DOE perspective and also other players we're talking about, they need to develop strategies to really optimize and maximize the synergies between electric vehicles and then with regards to renewable energy. And I can't recall right now the specifics, but there was some discussion around new incentives or new policies that are going to come out to be able to make that more clear and to enable that a little bit more, like that synergy and that combination. So, from taking it all together, I think it's a really exciting moment for the Philippines in terms of e-mobility. Many of the neighboring countries, of course, have been working on this maybe since a little bit earlier and have also invested a lot. And especially, I think some of the countries that have had automotive capacity or have manufacturing capacity to a much greater degree. So I think, again, different dynamics in different countries, but the common denominator is that they recognize the opportunity that EVs can bring if done properly in terms of thinking through all of the different factors and looking at strengthening the ecosystem to enable that shift.
Yeah, I'm not that positive about the Philippines because, as of course, you found that I was quite involved more than a decade ago with a very large project, and Philippines was ahead of rest of Asia. The Electric Vehicle Association of Philippines possibly was established in 2009 or something.
Yep.
No one knew which way is electric vehicle going, but still overall adoption has been very slow. Only this little island, Boracay, which has about 450 tricycles, those are electrified, but there are tons of places where nothing has happened. And so I'm a bit frustrated. Only positive that has happened very recently as BYD came in. They just celebrated 10,000 unit sales, I think last month or something. And as you drive around, you see a lot of BYDs. And as you exactly said correctly, that Philippines has the electric vehicle law that provides a lot of incentives. And so you don't have the excise duty. I benefited. I bought an electric car last month and I didn't pay any tax. They have a color coding system whereby, depending on the number, one day a week you cannot drive your car. But if you have a electric or hybrid, you are exempted. So that also gave people incentive. It's
Certainly.
working finally, but three-wheelers, two-wheelers need a lot of work. I don't know what's not taking up.
Yeah.
You don't need government to do this because Philippines has the law. You can get a car registered. Yeah, a lot of work still to be
It's
done.
a complex, certainly, it's a complex system too, and a complex landscape, I think, because you have all of these different entry points, so to speak, and you have the public transport, you mentioned jeepneys, three-wheelers, private cars. But I think that also translates a little bit to the richness of opportunity. And what we see in other countries, you might not see it right away first, but there might be a segment or a specific sub-segment that starts to electrify a lot faster. But even I think also the important thing is to have those building blocks and those enablers. And we also saw a lot of players very deeply invested in promoting and in working on those conditions.
But very small players, though, because the Philippines, my numbers are a decade old. So was importing $8 billion on fuel. And I did a back at the time, even we shifted 5 or 7% of cars into electric, you will save annually $1 billion in import. So it's a 7,000 island spread all over, and you can charge
Yeah.
all of those cars, boat, whatever, using solar.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is that it's generally small and slower in most countries, with the exception of the super leaders on EV. But I think it's again very interesting to see the progress and to pick up on those threads that really send some signals about the specific segments or opportunities that can electrify faster.
Yeah. So what has been your finding? Do you have some numbers as to what is the rate of electrification in two-wheelers or three-wheeler segment? Do you have some numbers for the Philippines?
I don't have them handy,
Okay.
but I can absolutely find those for you. Absolutely. Yeah. So we looked at public sector, certainly thinking about the jeepneys. We have numbers in our research, and actually it would be great if we can share the link to that as
Yes,
well
please.
for
Absolutely.
your audience. And that's something that we can add so that they can review that. But we looked at, as I said, the policy framework at the market. And so for the market, we looked at all of the most recent numbers for adoption, and including, of course, from the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, but also other players, and try to think up some scenarios, just thinking about these are some of the pathways or some of the possibilities, and these are some of the factors that can make a difference. Because you can have a lot of different types of forecasts and scenarios, but I think depending on what the actions that are taken by the different players, that's what is going to reveal at the end of the day what the progress is done. But yeah, I would love to, of course, have your audience check out our research as well.
Because the Philippines had one advantage, unlike Thailand or other countries in the region, where they have a domestic car manufacturing. So obviously, you have to
Mhm.
make sure those investments and a lot of investment dynamics at the high level. But Philippines has no car manufacturing. Honda was assembling many years back, but no longer. So it was a perfect opportunity to create a entire value chain of vehicle. That's what we tried to do as a nation development back project more than
Yeah.
a decade ago. So that was the idea that can we create an industry that will be about $15 billion industry just with the three-wheelers, and then of
Yeah.
grown.
And I think that's really interesting to hear about your experience there, Sohel, because of course, many different countries are also looking at what makes sense to them in terms of for them to position themselves. And we see that in the critical mineral space as well, I think. So we have this opportunity or there is this possibility, but does that mean you should pursue it and you should pursue developing an entire supply chain for something completely new to you in some cases? If you think about how long it has taken to develop the supply chain, it's not 3 years. Like it's years and years of developing an industry in those countries where there is automotive manufacturing, and including, of course, the U.S. and Mexico, where I'm from. So you have different dynamics, and as we talked about, so you have established expertise in an established industry. Then you have the advantage that you already know this industry very well. You have an incredibly established and mature ecosystem of suppliers and so forth. But when the EVs come in, now you have to shift that. And this is not a small change. As there are advantages and disadvantages. And then for countries that don't have the ICE manufacturing capacity, then it's like blank slate in a way. And in some cases could be this is good. And in some other cases there's still a big steep learning curve and so forth. And so you talked about investments. That is something that is absolutely needed. I do believe that working a lot and making sure that you're supporting homegrown companies, local companies, maybe that won't give you huge scale right away, but I do think it adds up. And so seeing those, what are some of those challenges to us at least, is just interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember when early 2010 or 11, we took up a large number of Department of Energy officials to Shanghai, and one of the government official in China was saying that if I want to build an internal combustion car, if I had
Mhm.
all the technology, I can't because all those patents and others you need to
Mhm.
start. But the electric vehicle, you can do whatever you want, the chassis, and all you need is a motor and a battery in the simplest form and
Yeah.
some sort of battery management controller or something. So it's a very easy thing to do. And I think that's what's happened in a large scale, the success of BIDs and so many Chinese cars. We have in Australia, I think all varieties of Chinese car there, and
Yep.
very nice cars. And they all did from bottom up, because you don't need so many patents to acquire before you can make a car. So it's a sort of new tech.
It's fascinating to watch, I think, a lot of those newer companies who have moved so fast and gone so far in terms of developing EVs. I think we can probably expect some consolidation as we go forward. And there are some absolutely wonderful vehicles. I think also down the road, the test will be, okay, are they quality vehicles? Are they functioning properly, et cetera, et cetera? And there's just going to be a lot to watch there, and what types of new vehicles also come out. So I think it's a really exciting space. And as I said earlier, we focus a lot on e-mobility, but we're also very interested in broader energy transition topics when it comes to the technologies, the people involved, the ecosystem to enable those shifts and continue to transfer knowledge across different countries.
Okay, because you are sitting in a very privileged position to know what are the policymakers across the regions are thinking, because you have mentioned that you are working to so many different countries, and also you are bringing or supporting an ecosystem for electric vehicle startups. So what do you tell someone of the listener who might just say, okay, yeah, I will do a three-wheeler startup in the Philippines? Where do they start? What do they need to know?
Okay, and that's a big question. To know a lot of different things. If you think about it from the company perspective, right? Do you have the right technology? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right business model? Those are some of the key things, right? You need to think about. And of course, doing the market research. What are the real needs? Because we are academically grounded organization, is that we look at the data. You have to look at the evidence, of course. And sometimes we see that there's just not enough market data in terms of what's really working, what are some of the pain points for the consumer. Earlier, I think you were getting to the consumer education side of things. So if there is still a really big gap in terms of, are those vehicles safe? How do they work? Why should we prefer those versus these? Or if there's a cost differential, if there's just issues in terms of what to charge and a lot of lack of knowledge, that's a problem. So I think as a company, understanding first and foremost the market in which you are planning to play and what are those points and what makes most sense for you to do in terms of business model and so forth is key. And then if you go a little bit outside of that, okay, what is the ecosystem? Do you have the right suppliers that you might need, et cetera, et cetera? And then what's also policy framework around it, a regulatory framework around it, as you said, that you will need to do, what types of incentives are out there, et cetera. But we really think that, or take business lens to things, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the business case, right? Is there a business case for these different technology to be able to take root and also be sustained over time and provide a better experience, better service for people, for climate, for communities, for the market, et cetera? That's going to be the question at the end of the day. And I think we can't expect for that to happen overnight, again, because the incumbent is something that has been established and created so many years ago and over time just reinforced. Whereas when disruption occurs, as it takes some time and there's more and more evidence of some of the key aspects or factors that can actually really make that work well for communities. So I think, yeah, for companies and innovators, those are some of the questions I would say that you need to look into before you launch into something. But also there's advantages to trying different things, right? Or like some of the people working on a lot more in that space talk about like failing fast and then continue to iterate to see what it is that works best for the particular market and the market conditions in which you are seeking to operate.
Yeah, thank you for that. You must have traveled across the Philippines, no? Where have you been?
You mentioned Boracay, and I was there. I've been there, but otherwise, Manila, mostly Manila, Metro Manila, and then Boracay. I was there before. We did some work in the past with that. Was some of my colleagues actually got to travel to Iloilo. I'm trying to remember what other cities. We engaged with different universities quite a few years back actually, and so that it's just been really wonderful to be able to work in the Philippines and learn about the ecosystem. And just also, as you said, really privileged position to work in different places and be able to compare and tease out some of those challenges and opportunities. For example, based on our work in Mexico, and to see how different that can be, and also what are some of the common things. But it's just there's another angle to the problem, or there's another layer to the opportunity. And I think that's one of the most exciting things of this work.
In Boracay, of course, you had to take an e-trike because there is no gasoline tricycle anymore. Did you have a chance to look at their battery swapping?
Not in Boracay, but I did see those in Manila. But I know that in Boracay specifically, and in some of the other places too, smaller communities, they have a lot of, again, battery swapping. And that is one thing, for example, that in the state in which we're working in Mexico and in other places in Mexico, you will not see. So there are different types of innovations that in another context are like, oh my gosh, what? How can you make this work? And then you see it in the Philippines and you see it places in Africa, of course, East Africa, super common. So what makes those work in a specific context but not another? That otherwise have certain types of resources and context. It's not or regulation. So those are some of the questions, right? Like why does that work here? And there's topic for those types of solutions, but not so much in other places. And so that's very interesting. But for my next time in Philippines, I will have to do that. And also the Palawan and some of the other stunningly beautiful places that I've
And
only seen pictures of.
they all need electric boats. Coming back to the business model, I'm working with a large company in Bangladesh where they're doing a battery as a service, two, three companies. So you basically charge sort of blocks. You take your battery out, put into
Yep.
the battery swapping, and it's a fixed daily fee rather than owning the piece of batteries. What was your comment as to why is not that taking off in the Philippines? Have you had a look? Do you have any?
In terms of the battery swapping model, I know that there's been actually some recent research or sort of recent, maybe a year or two ago in terms of for Africa. And actually they did, and that's something that I read with a lot of interest because they did an analysis of some of the specific challenges and why this specific to Africa, but in terms of the battery swapping model. And the capital costs are pretty high in terms of maintaining there are also many different ways of doing that and pricing that from the company's perspective. So that's an area that I'm actually interested in, as well as battery recycling and everything that comes with that. So in the Philippines, for this analysis, that didn't come through as something super prominent. So that's why we didn't delve into it in a lot more detail for that market. But that's something that, again, we are seeing grow in other places and really work well, including, of course, in Southeast Asia and in other places. I know Indonesia and where else that there's been a lot of, I was thinking about GoGoro and some of the other companies that, of course, were some of the first ones, the pioneers in this type of technologies.
Okay, so now that you have done this work in the Philippines, you earlier mentioned that the organization that you are in, you also provide support for startups. Are there any plans for any startup in the Asia Pacific region? You're working with ADB, so are there support that these startups or wannabe startups can approach or find?
We're super, super interested in more in this field specifically. And so we really look at accelerating enterprises. We're designing different types of engagement models right now to work with incubators, accelerators. So there's a little bit more of a structured approach there to scaling that type of support because we want to maximize impact. So how can we achieve greater impact faster? And a lot of that is through partnerships with incubators and accelerators. I think for companies, I'm very lucky to have a presence on LinkedIn where I get a lot of actual connections from innovators. And so I'm always open to connecting with those with new innovations, with ideas, both in the Philippines, but in many other places, and learning about that and looking at ways to both amplify their impact, try to put some data behind it. So I mentioned case study earlier. We do develop case studies for different needs to try to think about and talk about those types of innovations. But also there are other ways to provide support with market research, with some of our own projects, including sometimes engaging students from the University of Michigan, which is also a really cool model. So I encourage anybody interested working on energy and mobility innovations in low and middle income countries.
Okay, so they can reach out for training support, or you can also provide them or connect them for some financing.
Yeah, mostly right now we are doing the type of support is essentially in terms of business knowledge, as I mentioned. So in terms of market research, we've done collaboration with different startups to help them with market entry strategies, all of the topics related to growing their business. We also have an academy at WDI, so focused on entrepreneurship development and providing all of those tools. And another aspect that we do very well at WDI is my colleagues working on performance measurement and impact. And so the metrics part of that's also something that we work with companies and startups on to help them be able to tell the story about their impact specifically. So those are some areas or some ways in which we are engaging with companies, but we also, as I said, can help them tell the story about their innovations, look more deeply at their business model and at what potential pathways might be for growth, and then developing partnerships with incubators and accelerators, including to crowd in funding, certainly, but that's something that we're doing a little bit more structured, higher level way. It's so much one-on-one at the broader ecosystem level.
Okay, can we explore
That you like?
No, because there had been at least two different companies in the Philippines and one in Bangladesh, one in Sri Lanka. We discussed how the overseas foreign workers in those countries and how their money can be channeled through to make an investment in the country. So it's almost someone giving regular money for a nephew or niece's education. Rather than doing that, why don't you invest into three-wheeler, and the income from the three-wheeler can go and keep on going. It's almost like you buy a share, you keep on getting the dividend as opposed to providing a regular cash flow. And it can channel those resources. It can be a sort of a way of crowdsourcing those funds. And finally, I think I have a complete business model somewhere. I was doing something.
That sounds interesting. So we are seeing a lot of different types of platforms, right? Different types of platforms and engagement models precisely for that. And I think crowdfunding and so many other mechanisms that have been explored in recent years are opening up other opportunities and pathways for entrepreneurs and to bring entrepreneurship even closer or make it more accessible. I think that's one of the keys really to more development and economic growth. And it's something that we see not only for energy and mobility. If you think about EV, like conversion businesses and things like that, it does not take that much to be able to do that. Now, to do it, high quality and safety and all of those considerations in a way that fulfills all of that, it's a different thing. But I think that just means that there are so many other opportunities and possibilities for people to be able to engage on entrepreneurship. That's one of the pillars of our work at WPI.
Excellent. So what's your view? What will happen in terms of electric vehicle penetrations 5 years out? 2030 is just 5 years out, maybe even less.
So I still hold the view that the next 5 years are critical, okay, in terms of EV transition. Because as we know, just from the perspective, we think about climate considerations and goals, etc. There is a real urgency in terms of making progress there to mitigate emissions and to clean up and make transform mobility so that it is more sustainable in the longer term. So I do think that the next 5 years are key. I see that different countries are taking different pathways, but I do think that a year, 2 years can make a big difference if there are the right policy conditions in place. So I think in terms of our work, we are all about, as a business, looking at the market dynamics, but certainly the policy lever cannot be ignored. And without that support and enabling environment, it is just very difficult, I think, for such a big transition to take place. And so that's one of the areas that we look at and examine. And that's also why working with policy leaders and government leaders is so important too. So there are many possibilities in countries in which we are working and in countries we're interested in. We will continue to monitor the trends and look for opportunities to partner with stakeholders really committed to making a difference, because it is about actions that they take to be able to support. I think if you look at the market and even the consumer education and awareness, we see, like, I can tell you, for example, our work in Mexico, which started in 2021, and even in the past 4 years, we see a big difference every time we are there working with the partners. More and more people talking about EVs, more and more people understand what electric mobility means. There are new programs now at universities focused on e-mobility, which did not exist before, because there is that recognition that there is a need for talent, there is the need to upgrade the skills, to develop new opportunities for the next generations to be able to contribute to that. There are companies pivoting into this space, and we are also helping some of those companies in documenting their processes in terms of those EV pivots, which is always very exciting. And there is a lot more discussion around that. So that gives me hope in terms of that progress. And it's also very interesting for our work, and it can provide some insights again to decision makers in other places.
Yeah, but one interesting thing, you mentioned climate. Of course, the climate issues were very important for electric vehicles when we started. Solar was important, but now we don't need climate. It's dumb. If somebody wants to invest in coal, it's really a dumb decision because solar is the cheapest form of electricity. So similarly, I sneaked into a gasoline station, I think yesterday, because I drive an electric car here in Manila just to get my tire pressure check, and it's free. And I was thinking that an electric car, 100 kilometer, to do that, you need about 12, 13 kilowatt hour. Even in the Philippines, electricity is expensive. Even that is about $2, maybe $2.30. Whereas you take a gasoline car, you need about $6 to run. It's one third of savings. Why do we complicate that story? It's one third the cost. Even I interviewed somebody on my podcast, a couple, and they said, we are getting all this free electricity. And there are a lot of supermarkets that have free electric chargers, and they have a solar at home. So I think that part is very important, that it's really a dumb thing to do. And it's really a sad thing for electric three-wheeler drivers paying 5 times, six
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
more to transport a person from A to B when the alternative is already there and it's cheap. We don't have to wait
It
for the
is so much
government or
cheaper.
regulators. Just it needs to happen. So that's the frustration I have.
Such an important point. But you know, also help that has to trickle down.
That's where the
That will
communication part comes.
That is the communication part and the consumer education part, and the making things easy and visible. You gas stations everywhere, but you don't see charging stations. And if you don't know a lot about how they charge, in some cases, some vehicles, they just simply charge overnight in the depot or at home or whatever. But if you don't see, it's not as visible and as easy and as intuitive, then you have that gap in understanding and in knowledge. But you're right, it is the business case is for many different segments, for the livelihoods of people who really lives and income depends on those types of jobs. It can make a huge difference, as you point out, in terms of take home income that you actually have at the end of the week or at the end of the month or whatever. So that's another consideration in addition to benefits in terms of air pollution and so forth, which are also considerations. But you're right, there has to be about the product. It has to be about cost and about how easy, right? The affordability and the accessibility of the product. I think from that perspective, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, but I think it's very important, and you are doing an amazing job when you mentioned that you have all the knowledges that you have gathered and sharing them. I just give you another example. I'm part of a electric vehicles owners Facebook group here in the Philippines. So someone mentioned, I want to go from here to Baguio and a bit farther. How should I go? And of course, there are a lot non-EV members in that group. I don't know how, or people have. And someone said, oh, your new car, maybe you take a driver with another car behind you in case it does not work. And
No.
discussion was going on and on. I said something, and then someone came back saying, listen, I have done this last week, and this is where I charge. And someone else said, I really did not need to charge. I could go all the way and then charge overnight.
Yeah.
And then the whole group discussion said, okay, that penny dropped because of that communication, because there's
Yeah.
so much
Absolutely. It is normal because it remains a newer technology than, although it was invented also many years ago, but it remains a newer and less well-known technology. But again, I think the very cool thing also in the Philippines is that you have, as I said, and in other markets too, different entry points. You talked about it might be a three-wheeler in Boracay that you see, oh, it's electric and it works just fine. And that's what everybody's doing. That just becomes part of its normal versus even here in the US, and it's also adoption is continuous, but it is about 9-10% market share. So you will see them, but it's not, oh, that's the only vehicle, or in some places you do not see them at all. So there's that element too. And that's the part that is going to take a little bit of time and a lot of action, intentional action, I believe, for that to continue.
So from as part of your work, are you also sharing a lot of those knowledge or simple sort of myths that floats around range anxiety and all of those things? And where can people find those resources?
Absolutely. I try to put out bite-sized pieces of some of our research, but also research and information that I'm reading and reviewing by other organizations, experts. And I do a lot of that on LinkedIn and try to make it very digestible because, of course, we are really an action and solutions-based organization. So we try, our research is not intended to just sit on a shelf and be extremely long or boring, but quite actionable. So we try to distill those insights into very easy to digest knowledge products. So we have all of those on our website. I absolutely will include the link to that and to our recent report in the Philippines and some of our other work focused on e-mobility for your audience.
Yeah, thank you. As part of the ADB work, are you also doing for the mass communication, people who don't have LinkedIn, who do not have Facebook, who do not have a smartphone, how they are going to learn about electric vehicle? Are they part of a wider communication strategy as well?
Yeah. So we did in the Philippines, we have done some webinars with different stakeholders. That, of course, still involves some, you need a device, of course, to be able to join that. But through our partners who have contributed to the research and to all of the work, including, of course, the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, Clean Air Asia, they're working on a really exciting e-mobility ASAP project as well. They're doing a lot of that work grounded in communities and involving stakeholders to communicate and more about electric vehicles. And I think I agree with you. That's a really important work that needs to be done and continue to be done. And I know that ADB is also very committed getting the information there. And so those are some of the things that we'll be exploring as a next step now that we have concluded the research.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything I could have asked? Sorry, I got carried away a bit because this is a very pet topic of mine.
This is great. No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation. And also, obviously, I would love to learn even more about your experience in the Philippines working on EVs, because I know you were also one of the pioneers working there on the Three Wheelers program. And yeah, it's exciting to see what's happening. And again, just I'm looking forward to continue to collaborate with others.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohel.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. If you enjoyed this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.